legacies can fade. Everything that he was, they were able to portray in that film. They were like, Tim, there is enough footage like that we could have done a 12-hour documentary on him. So to know that there's that much documentation in that light is pretty incredible.
Ladies and gentlemen, you wanted it, you got it. The place for the untold, real, raw, and juicy stories of dirt track racing. It's Dirt Track Confessions. And now here's your host, Mandee Mahaney.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Dirt Track Confessions. I'm your host, Mandee Pauch Mahaney. I am absolutely honored to be welcoming on such a great man onto this week's podcast, Tim Clawson, who is the father of Bryan Clauson. Tim, how are you over there?
Busy. Doing well, but a lot this time of year, of course, a lot going on. Just finishing up the month of May, and now we're rolling into the busiest few months of the season with the sprint car team.
Oh my gosh, and we're going to touch on all of that. So Now everyone listening in, everyone in our sport, everyone knows of your son Bryan and the massive legacy that he has left behind. Especially, we were just talking prior to recording, especially now even more after the release of the Chasing 200 documentary that recently just came out. So there are absolutely, I feel like there are no words that could ever do Bryan justice by describing the incredible man that he was. And, I feel like he touched the lives of so many and still continues to do so today. But today, I want to shift gears. I want to talk about Tim. We're going to dig into this guy here.
Right.
Tim has done what I feel most fathers would do. Carry on their son's passion for the sport, and most importantly, carry on his name. But Tim didn't do it in any regular old-fashioned way. Tim did it in a way I'm perceiving as like what Bryan would have wanted. So the Chasing 200 documentary, it was so well done. I smiled, I laughed, I bawled my eyes out. If you're listening in and you haven't watched it, I'm gonna tell listeners right now, pause this, come back to this episode, because you're gonna want to watch the documentary first. Trust me, promise me, you're gonna want to do that. But for Tim, so the documentary, I feel like it really helps paint the full picture of all that you and your family really did to help make Bryan become the man and the driver that he was. But I'm curious, from your standpoint as a father, what was family life like when Bryan was racing, right? He was racing everywhere, anything with wheels on it, I'm sure. IndyCar, NASCAR, USAC, World of Outlaws, everything in between. But how did you and your family really keep that balance and just keep it all together?
Yeah, when Bryan, started racing professionally, of course, he had a younger sister, Taylor, and she was very involved with soccer and, played high school soccer, then college soccer. So, a lot of their youth growing up, we did the conquer and divide, where Di would go with Tay, I would go racing with Bryan. We kind of had a rule that if we were within 2 hours of wherever things were going on, that we'd make our best effort to get there to support both the kids. Obviously, as Bryan's career took off, it became harder to do for me. But then fortunately, we had our family team for several years where, we ran USAC midgets and sprint cars. And then, he was hired by Tony Stewart to drive the 20 sprint car, which, allowed me to almost become dad again, not car owner, not crew chief, coach, all that stuff. And so I got to kind of back off a little bit, and kind of enjoy watching his racing, from the dad type scenario. With that, I still kept a midget here, or, I'd build a non-wing sprint car and, we'd play with it a little bit, but it definitely took a lot of that pressure off of me as he was going through, again, when he got to be, a truly hired professional driver. We circle back to 2016, the end of 2015, when he was putting his Chasing 200 tour together, and he reached out to me and, said, hey, this is what I'm going to do. And I'd like you to run, our non-wing program. And, it started off with, hey, it's going to be like my backup to the backup plan. We'll have these 25 races scheduled, but you're going to be the team that if I rain out someplace, I'm hauling butt back to Indiana, and we're going to go find a race to run to help with the count. And through that, I took over his midget program as well. So the last year, I thank God every day that I got to spend that time with Bryan and really get to appreciate him as a professional that he became. Still my son, but now I was getting to go race with this professional race car driver.
Absolutely. And I that you just led me into my next question, because I was always so curious, after watching, of course, the documentary, again, it really helps paint the picture of how you guys put it together, and really seeing, like you said, Bryan's vision coming to life. But what was it like trying to schedule all of those races? Like you just said, like you were kind of like, just, you had the car there and ready, but like the moving pieces, you can't fit, I mean, maybe a midget. Like you can't fit 5 different cars, in a trailer at a time. So you having one car ready to go, like if the races rain out or whatever it might be, like how did you guys literally, did you have like a calendar and like color coordinate like options or?
Yeah, that like the putting the actual schedule together. Bryan did a lot of that on his own. Kind of the start of this idea went way back several years, and they kind of explain it in the Chasing 200 documentary. But we were at a race at Paris, and for a prelim night for Oval Nationals, I think, and it was a sparse crowd, not a lot of money to win, and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. actually sent Bryan a picture from Charlotte World Finals that was going on, and the grandstands were packed, and fireworks, and I think they actually had all the cars on. It was just the visual of it was like, man, why aren't we there? And that's what Bryan said afterwards. He said, we're kind of looking at what I want to go forward doing with my career, is that's what I want to do. I want to be at every big race in the country, no matter midget, non-wing, wing, 360, 305, 410. I don't care. Dad, what we need to do is build a big trailer and just stuff it full of cars and parts, and let's go do it. And guys, it's probably not going to work out doing it that way. And so, as he always had this idea, and when him and David Bird got together for the Indy 500 project, it kind of resurrected itself. And by that time, Bryan was pretty well connected throughout, all forms of motorsport, be it the stock car stuff, again, midget, non-wing, West Coast, East Coast, it didn't matter. He had some relationships, or a lot of relationships built. So he was able to say, Mike Martin, who was a big piece of that in, January. So he flies out in January, and he spends basically the whole month racing for Mike, and, all the West Coast stuff, Arizona stuff. So Mike has a team out there for him. Again, we did the non-wing Midwest sprint car team, and then eventually the USAC midget team. Matt Wood had the wing program for him. And so he was able to put all these different pieces together to logistically actually make it to where the hardest job then became him figuring out how he was going to get to each race. And, so that's where we kind of came in with our stuff, is that, we had a set schedule of 25 races that we were for sure going to do. And it actually grew to more of that when we took over the midget, but those were our races we were committed to. But then again, the deal was that if he was racing within a day's travel, we had to have that stuff ready to go. And we planned it all out. Hey, if Knoxville rains out on a Saturday night, you can get back and run Kokomo on Sunday. So we kind of had those pieces all figured out, and there were a couple of those that happened, and and looking back on it, were probably some of the funnest races to go do on a whim.
And I feel like just envisioning that the whole game plan, like just coming to fruition, I can see like everyone being like, okay, of all the people to attempt this and to be able to accomplish this would be Bryan. So like it's almost like it just had to be a decision. And all the people were just like, almost, they wanted to be a part of that. like history in the making.
I mean, really, as the idea came to fruition, at first you're like, this is nuts. There's no way. But as the pieces started getting put to place in really in the quality of teams that he got to race for, it did become exciting. And, I think probably put a little bit of pressure on each team because we didn't want to be the teams that failed him in this pursuit, right? Not only, doing the 200, but running up front, being competitive, winning races, all those things that were, top of his mind, along with chasing the 200. So as it went, momentum kind of built, and then we all, not, obviously me as a dad and that, it was great to get to, to enjoy that with him. But then the responsibilities that the teams took in making sure that they were 100% prepared to do it was, looking back on it, was pretty cool to see that all happen as well.
Yeah, and that leading into that, Tim, you're like setting me up right here with my questions. You're nailing it. So with all of the different rides, right? Like, I mean, do you even know off the top of your head like how many people were lined up, like different rides?
I would be lying if I said I knew exactly, but I believe there was in total like 10 different teams that either were involved or were going to be involved. When he was done racing in the U.S. Here, he always went to New Zealand. Well, that team over there, he went over there to race midgets. Well, that team over there not only had his midgets over there for him, but they actually put together a wing sprint car for him so he could double up on some of those nights. And so, the investment that a lot of teams made, and you got to remember, you're doing this chase. You're not the only point championship we were really going to chase that year was the USAC midget because it all kind of fell into where it worked, but nobody else could go chase points or get into that rhythm of racing, 40, 50 times a year, with the exception of the wing sprint car team. But even then, they're not chasing points. So to see the commitment level from these high quality teams that, just wanted to be a part of something special like that was, it was insane.
And so, okay, so with the different rides, right? Mm-hmm. My question is like, how did Bryan manage like setting up the car? Did he have different notes? I mean, I know he's raced at plenty of the tracks, but did he have like, that one crew chief that he entrusted in? Obviously, not one crew chief was doing all of them, right? So like, did he have this? And we're not here to talk bad about anyone, of course. Yeah. But like, I'm sure there were some like highs and lows of some teams. But how did Bryan just have the right people to set up each car that he literally just showed up and just did his thing?
Yeah, I mean, so when I talk about the people and the networking that he created throughout his whole career, when I look back at what Bryan did best is he got great people to work together towards the common goal, whatever it was. And so every car that he had, or every team that he raced for during this Chasing 200, were teams that he had success with. Again, I'll start with Mike Martin out west. Well, he'd been driving for Mike for 3 or 4 years on the West Coast stuff, and they won. I mean, I think there was one January, February where they won like 11 of 12 races or something together. So he could go out, sit in the car, knew what he had. Our stuff was always good with the midget and non-wing car, and he had Shane Bowers, Noisy, that took care of his wing program on the Matt Wood deal. So everybody that he had total trust in. And Bryan was never he wasn't the guy that went and, worked on his stuff, right? When we raised him through the quarter midgets and go-karts and all that, quite frankly, I didn't want him, changing gears or that stuff. But his job was to tell me when to change gears, what he needed in the race car, and let me, in that realm, let me do my job. And so that's the way when he went racing, he approached it all. He didn't have to go, spend all these hours in the shop. I mean, although he did spend a lot of hours in the shop, keeping everybody motivated in that. But I mean, every team he drove for had people in place that he had already had success with and trusted.
And that's so important. I mean, I see it my dad, my brother, my husband, you see it all across the board is like the driver's got to feel confident in the car.
Yeah.
Like, especially in open wheel, 1,000%. Like you need to feel confident. And like you showed up after flying how long and you're just going. You want to be able to just jump in, strap in, and go. And that's
no, and that's true across the board, but especially when you're going, wing car at Knoxville to a midget at Beloit, right? Because just the transition in driving the cars were so, and we would learn nuances with Bryan too, right? Like if he went and ran a string of wing races and was coming back to run the midget at a short track, well, it was inevitable that he was going to drive it off the end of the racetrack the first or second lap, right? So you learn to have those conversations with him, like, hey, buddy, you don't have a wing up there, it's you got to back her down a little bit, but again, a lot of that, every crew had worked with him enough that they knew that, so there's a lot of things that we were able to get ahead of before we even had to worry about it.
So like you said, this was long in the making.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so he had, I like that. So now, total side note is, again, in the documentary. So maybe this is just because it intrigues me because of doing the t-shirts and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like Lauren and Bryan, they show like, they've got the trailer and then they've got like the motorhome stacked with like boxes everywhere. Like, do you even know how the heck they even balance that? Because I've talked to a lot of like nowadays, like the wives that all they do is the t-shirt sales. Like that's their job. And I just can't imagine, because you're taking off in an airplane, you're driving in a truck, you're driving in the trailer, you're in the motorhome, like how do they do that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously a lot of work. Lauren, she pretty much handled all that for him. And it's probably the logistics of all that became difficult, because as momentum built with the Chasing 200, it almost became mainstream where, I remember going to a race in Arkansas someplace, and like a news crew showed up, just a normal local news station showed up, wasn't racing related, but they wanted to document and talk about this Chasing 200. Obviously, the Indy 500 piece of it weighed heavily. So it was almost becoming not just within the racing world that this was starting to gain traction, but in mainstream, which was cool. But then it added to the merchandise sales and all of that. So as it kept going, all that kept ramping up, which then made it, even more difficult to, for them to manage. Again, I was always so focused on the competition side of it that I let them handle that piece of it.
I get that, because you need that separation, just like you got done saying how you didn't want Bryan focusing on changing the gears or checking the stagger or whatever it was. Like, you just want him focused, like you have one job, and he was damn good at it, right? And then like Lauren did the merchandise, like built Bryan up as the personality of who he is, and I do the same thing. I don't know if I do a good job with the t-shirts.
It's my disdain. I disdain merchandise, but it's part of the culture, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting. We just ran a high limit race over at Lawrenceburg, and obviously when we race in Indiana, which we don't get to do much anymore, Kokomo and Lawrenceburg is really it. But so there's always a large group of people that go with us, friends and family, and that, and we got talking about it afterwards, almost the merchandise experience, going and talking to, like you, when you're working it, how much that experience is part of the whole night experience now. And, you see enough to see what y'all have to deal with sometimes. But it has become that, it's part of the show now. And it's it's cool to watch where it was. I remember on the USAC deal, I think Bryan was probably the first one to have a real merch trailer back in the day. And then went wing racing and found out it was way too small, and had to expand on that. So, I mean, that's part of it, and it's really become part of our culture now.
especially, I'm sure you see it with all your drivers now, because it's, and for my husband, that is like probably the biggest thing that he's like, I could do without, is having to always be on. You know, like
Mhm.
I do the documenting, we do YouTube, we've got the podcast, like
Yeah.
you're always, it's like you're always put on a pedestal, no matter what level you're at, what kind of driver you are, like you're always on. And so for me, with the creative standpoint, was I was so blown away. I didn't even, I maybe I knew, but I did not know, was they were documenting all of this.
Yeah.
And I chills, like genius. Like, how did you feel? Because again, like you said, you were more focused on the car. So I've had it where some car owners are like, oh, she, like, here's the wife coming in trying to videotape and be, I don't know, distraction, but you kind of almost need to do that these days.
Yeah, well, and we knew going in what it was going to be, because they'd kind of put the deal together for the behind the helmet stuff that they were doing. The Chasey 200. We had the cameras with us a lot. Our guys did. Our crew guys did. And you almost become numb to it. But like when, obviously, with the Chasing 200 documentary, I'm so thankful that he did it, that Lauren did it, that we all participated in it. It's like I've watched the documentary 3 times now. Di and I watched it the first time by ourselves, and it was very, very hard to even get through. And then the second time, all of our guys they were getting ready to leave to get on the road before the premiere. So I said, well, hey, let's sit down as a team, and I want you guys to see this. And so we sat down as a team, and then and it was better for me. It was still pretty hard, but it was better. But then at the premiere, it was, my wife probably put it best. She goes, I just spent 2 hours with my son that I thought I'd never get back. And the way they were able to put that together, and there's so much racing documented, right? At the track, after, victory lane stuff. And there's so much of that out there, but for so many different drivers, but to then have those behind the scenes raw traveling up and down the road, it was a gift for us, absolutely. And it gives people who, we're almost 8 years removed now from Bryan's passing. So there's a whole segment of people that know the story, through our racing and through Driven to Save Lives and all those type of things, but they never knew Bryan the person. And it's interesting now to talk to people who didn't know Bryan, they knew of Bryan, but now they've watched the documentary and they're like, we get it. We get his legacy. And it's again, it's a gift that none of us really expected coming out of that documentary.
And so when this was when the documentary, when did you guys start, when did they start piecing this together, I guess?
Well, it was a little over a year ago. Well, probably 2 years ago now, when they talked about doing the whole Legend series, right? Yeah. So they wanted to do something, from back in the day. Then they wanted to do, an AJ Foyt for that era, and Mel Kenyon and Rich Vogler for that era. And then they wanted to do something with Bryan for, the modern era. Mm-hmm. And so, like I say, it's probably 2 years ago when they were like, hey, we're going to do this. But I think as his legacy kind of grew out of the race car, it was like, let's not just document the racing piece of it, but let's document the person he was, and then let's document what's happened since then. Of course we, absolutely, we wanted, that's the way we would have done it. I would have never in a million years thought they would have created what they did. And they took such care of making sure that they told it the right way. And that's like talking to, all the people that were involved with producing it, even down to, everybody that talked through the film, they felt this responsibility to do it the right way. And I mean, and they nailed it.
They did. They did. Um, yesterday, yeah, it was yesterday. My husband was coming back from the races and his guys were driving. I was like, you're going to watch this tonight because you're going to love it, because he never, I don't know if he ever even got to meet Bryan.
Mhm.
And like, I mean, I knew you guys because when you guys always came east, and when Billy was racing like midgets in
Yeah.
Indiana and stuff, and so I just got done. I was just like, I felt satisfied. I was like, the documentary did him like the justice that he, not that he needed, but like he should
Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It just told the story, right? And it's, it, to me, again, I always go back to, obviously I love racing films and I love racing documentaries. But this one was different. It showed him as we knew him as Bryan, from the time he was born, and the goofiness, the sense of humor, sometimes the cockiness, everything that he was, they were able to portray in that film. And I think, out of everything, it showed his love for the sport. Not just driving race cars or just winning races, but his true love for racing, and I forget who it was that told me, but they were like, Tim, there is enough footage like that we could have done a 12-hour documentary on him, or we could do 3 or 4 more and touch so many different levels of his career. And so to know that there's that much documentation in that light is pretty incredible.
Don't miss out. Get insider-only updates and exclusive content inside Club DTU. Receive access to live updates, exclusive content, early access, special merchandise, discounts, community chat, recognition, and more. All inside one place. Club DTU. Head over to patreon.com/dirttrackuntold to join the club.
And I pray that they release that, because it's like it just made me think of it. I think it was 2 years ago. A woman, Buffy Swanson, wrote my dad's book, and same thing as Bryan is. Now I understand my dad's, like, how he got to here, and the valleys of it. And I told my dad, I was like, okay, so now people get to know the connection, but I want like the dirt, Dad. I was like, let's let people really know who you are, because until I started doing my YouTube videos, people are like, wow, Billy Pauch is actually kind of fun. And I'm like, yeah, they're not just race car drivers. So I love that so much.
Yeah. So I'll tell you a quick story. I don't know if I've shared this with you before, but Bryan, years ago, I think they were back for Eastern Storm and they got rained out or something. So he called me and said, hey, I'm going to run a speedster tonight.
Yeah.
What the heck is a speedster? So he's, it's like a midget, but I'm going to run it. So he runs it, and he calls me afterwards. I'm, well, how'd it go? And he goes, I was the meat in a Hall of Fame sandwich. And it was, I don't know if your dad won or ran third, but I think it was maybe Kenny Brightbill.
Yes, it was. It was,
so it was
Kenny, my dad.
Yeah, so he was the meat in a Hall of Fame sandwich. And I always loved it from the fact that, I mean, he was pretty young then, but he knew they were Hall of Famers, and so I just, that was pretty cool. And I think we ran into you guys and your dad at Williams Grove, a few years after that. And I remember them, just standing back, having this conversation. I just thought how cool that was that, your dad and Bryan and, these guys having these icons of the sport, following what Bryan was doing.
And I always love that is the drivers like Bryan that have the respect for the drivers who have paved the way, who have, and I always admire that about Bryan. And of course I had to go back, I had to do my reminiscing of, I watched the documentary. I'm like, hang on. So I went back to the conversations, and like one of the last conversations I had with Bryan was, I texted him, I was like, my father, it was, when he was doing the Chasing 200, I texted him, I was like, my father has never bought another race car driver's t-shirt. He just bought yours.
Oh my God.
And he was cool. Like, no way. I was like, you are a somebody, dude. I was like, I mean, it's my dad, but at the same time, like, he's literally never bought a t-shirt, and he wore that so proud that year.
Oh, that is awesome. That is awesome.
Ah, I love it. So,
yeah.
Okay, so let me shake off here. Okay, so I have a ton of people, race car drivers, that listen to this podcast. Now, turning it kind of for them, I feel like, it's not always sunshine and rainbows, right? And I feel like a lot of people, hit obstacles along their way. Like, for you guys, did you ever have, you have to miss a race, right? Because I don't know, your team, the car owner was like, you know what, Bryan, you really should be on this race, or maybe you weren't running well, like you kind of said you guys had paved your way, right? He had the good team and the good backing, but I'm sure at times there were certain motors or cars or crew you're working with that it wasn't really the best. Maybe Bryan wanted to make a change, and the crew chief was like, I don't know about that. Like, I know Bryan was easygoing, right? But he was also very smart. So I'm sure stars weren't always lined up perfectly, as most think. Like, you watch, I need to keep bringing back the documentary, but you watch it, and to me, it almost seemed effortless. Because Bryan was Bryan. But there had to been some hardships for decisions that he had to make,
Yeah, I mean, there obviously, injuries, played into it. I know they talked about when he hurt his neck at Wheatland, and and leaving there, we didn't know if he was going to make it. Number one, we didn't know if he was going to be paralyzed. Number two, and and I'm not as spiritual as I probably need to be, but I made a deal with God that night that if he got him through this, that we wouldn't race anymore. And I told Bryan that, and and he said, well, that was your deal with God, not mine.
That was your deal, sorry.
Yeah. And so says, you need to figure that one out, Dad. But so obviously, there's those moments that are tough. The one thing about Bryan was he was very loyal to car owners, to crew people. I know when him and Matt first got together on the wing stuff, they struggled mightily. He went out to California. I don't think they made a show. 4 or 5 races, and he called me. I think it was after Tulare, and I said, how's it going? And he goes, I'm just getting my ass handed to me out here. And I was like, well, I got stuff. We've been putting on wing cars together. And he said, not a chance. He goes, as long as Matt will stick with me, I'm going to figure this stuff out. And he did. The loyalty there was probably on Matt's side to put up with his learning curve, but he did. Then they hired Noisy, and and things took off from there. And I know that crew, Noisy was crew chief. Adam Clark, who now is crew chief for Geo, was the car chief on it. Jim Bob was a tire guy. He loved those guys. And when I talk about his ability to pull people together, part of our schedule was Midget Week. Well, he had those guys all come to Midget Week and hang out and help. And, we probably ruined them all from ever wanting to do midgets again. But that's just kind of the way he was. He ran the 82 Buffalo Wild Wing car, which really was the team that gave him an opportunity in a wing car. And, that was a good race car with a good mechanic. And when, they ran half a season or so, and then Bryan got working on this Chasing 200 deal, and what they wanted to do and what he wanted to do just wasn't a good match. And so I think they wanted to race a lot more with the wing car than he wanted to obligate to at that point. So they split up, and I can remember we were someplace, and having breakfast, and fans were like, their loss, and they shouldn't have fired you. And Bryan's like, wait a minute, I'm not mad at these guys. They're the ones that gave me my chance. If not for them, I would not have ever been in a wing car. So the loyalty piece of it was always really big for him. through his career, when he was really young, he signed a NASCAR deal with Ganassi that didn't pan out. So he went down, um, won an ARCA race, and had some decent runs, but things just didn't work out. And he said, well, you know what, that's okay. I'm gonna go back, and I want to win Chili Bowl. I want to win the Belleville Nationals. I want there's all these iconic that I didn't think I'd ever get to do, and so it changed his outlook. Went back to doing what he loved to do, right? Like the NASCAR stuff was going to pay him very well, and did for a moment. But he found out that money doesn't buy happiness, and he just loved everything about racing. And so when times get tough, that's what he would always fall back on. Look, bad night, man. I'm still living the dream, right? You want to be a race car driver, go do a start and park deal for a couple of weeks. That's hard to do.
Yeah.
Having a bad night in a sprint car is not hard to do.
That's so true. I love that. I should have known that was gonna be your answer. He was always so positive, and if one door closes, it's like, well, we go through this one.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I think until you go through these things, it's hard, right? I mean, if you're a race car driver, you're competitive. Brian was able to reach at a fairly young age that he knew one race didn't define him, right? I win 4 or 5 races, then I have a bad night. Well, I doesn't mean I'm a bad race car driver. It does. That kid that walks up and still wants an autograph, right? He seems to still love me, so he was able to really figure that piece of it out early. So even like when he went, goes to Indy the first year, and I mean, right out of the box there, you're like, what is going on here? He's on the leaderboard and think they have a shot at the Fast 9. Well, then he crashes, and that kind of ruins the month. Then when he came back in 15, it was not a good experience for him at all. And but he was always like, look, I know I can drive these things. I did it for damn near a month in 2012. So he was able to figure out pretty early that he was never defined by a bad moment, or if he happened to lose a ride, didn't define him, and he would soldier on, and because he loved the sport that much.
I like that. That's how it should be, because there's so many drivers out there, and it's you don't win, and it's like the morale just goes down and goes down. I'm like, it's hard to keep yourself back up, right? But no one else is gonna do it but yourself. So. Yeah,
I mean, it's a hard sport, and if you don't, look, I feel like with the guys we go racing with, especially this year, I mean, I think probably 2 of the top 5 guys in the country were blessed to have one in our car and one we partnered with, and it's interesting to watch them have a bad night, and it's like, guys, like. This doesn't. You guys are still the same 2 race car drivers, and so, and they, obviously, with Sunshine, he's been with us forever. So a lot of him is what he watched Bryan do at where he's at right now, and so it's pretty cool watching him, go through that. But it's crazy to me that a guy can go win 5 or 6 races, have one bad night, and it's everybody's ready to jump off the cliff. And so managing. So when you talk about other race car drivers, it is, I understand how tough it can be, but a lot of it is, number one, the people you surround yourself with. It's having that positive attitude. It's learning from a bad night or 2 or 3 or 4. But bottom line is, this stuff is not easy anymore, and it's getting harder at the national levels, no matter what the series is.
Yeah, that's so true. So speaking of Sunshine, now correct me if I'm wrong on like the time, but I think it was it around 2008 when you guys, you and Bryan came up with Bryan Clauson Racing?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yay. So again, always loved how selfless Bryan was. I feel like he didn't want to only be the top man on the totem pole. he knew that other kids, they needed opportunities, and you guys are bound to make that happen. Now, how did that come about?
Well, so Bryan was blessed when he was, he was in a sprint car very young. Um, Kokomo allowed us to run when he was 13 years old, and we just ran Kokomo.
Wow.
And he had some pretty good runs there, which then opened up. I think Lincoln Park Speedway reached out and said, "Hey, we trust what he's doing. If you guys want to come down here and run." And then the next year, he's still 13, but turning 14 in June, Bloomington, and then the rest of the tracks, Lawrenceburg, decided that he could run. Well, when we were doing that, especially Bloomington on a Friday night down there, everybody was there. Kevin Briscoe, Dave Darlin, Tony Elliott, John Stanbro, Hall of Famers. It was like the place to be. And he had enough speed that they all kind of took him under his wing, right? Under their wing. And I think they did it more to like, hey, kid, you're pretty fast. Don't crash me, right? Yeah. Crash yourself before you crash me. But with that being said, they did. They every one of those guys I mentioned, I believe is a lot of the reason where Bryan not only became the driver that he was, but the way he approached the sport. And so when new kids would come along, he took a lot of ownership in wanting to do for them what these icons of the sport did for him. Yeah. Bryan Clauson Racing actually started when he was down south, and he was doing, he wasn't doing a full season of Nationwide yet. So he was probably doing 15 to 20 stock car races and kind of bored. And so he's like, hey, let's build a midget. Because he looked at scheduling, he's like, I could run that the most because they had a lot of, midget weeks and things like that. So he said, let's build a midget. And then when I'm not running it, let's find a young kid to put in it and kind of give them an opportunity. And so that's kind of how it started. So we did that for, a couple years. And then when he came back, we basically had the foundation for him to, run a USAC midget out of our own shop.
Okay. So then I feel like that beginning leads into what you guys have with Clawson Marshall Racing,
mm-hmm.
right? So how did that conversation come about with Richard and Jennifer?
Well, it really goes back to a conversation that Bryan and I had years ago, and it was the night we lost Jason Leffler. Yeah. And we were racing Gas City that night, and for whatever reason, because Jason and him weren't really close, but they were down south about the same time frame, and I'm sure there was a connection because they were both USAC guys, and but that one kind of hit him different. And we were on the way home, and I made the comment to him that buddy, we don't have to go race tomorrow night. And he's like, what are you talking about? Of course we're racing tomorrow night. And I'm not saying we're not. I'm just saying we don't have to. And he kind of went into a pretty deep conversation about, listen, Dad, I'm a racer because you're a racer. And, if you're driving a race car, if you pass doing that, then you're dying doing something you love to do. And he said, Dad, if something happened to you, I'm going to continue racing. You know that. And if something happened to me, I would want you to continue racing. And so, of course, during that time, the last thing on your mind is, well, we're going to put a team back together. So, but it became pretty clear to me the way the racing community just surrounded our family. Sorry. I couldn't walk away. It's I'm very honest about what's kept me alive. There was a moment where I wasn't sure I was going to make it back from Belleville. But the racing community to this day still does that. And so we get back and, go through the things you need to go through. And then Kokomo had the celebration of life for Bryan, and Richard and Jennifer, they flew in for that. And Richard and Jennifer partnered on a lot of things that Bryan did in his racing. part of the Chasing 200. They part of the 2015 IndyCar program, part of our Chili Bowl. I mean, they just were always a part of something with us. And so after the Sunday after, we went to breakfast before they were going to fly back, and Richard and I just got talking, and it really wasn't about race teams or the future. I had kind of made a comment that if I ever were going to go back, I would want to do it in the vein of what all I learned about Bryan. And the stories that I heard, the interactions that I heard. I was like, Richard, simply, if I did something, when I decided to walk away, my goal would be for the sport to say, well, we were better for them being here. Which then led into, Richard saying, look, I don't know if you want to do anything or when you'll want to do anything. But if you do, I want to be a part of it. I don't really care what it is we do. And so we talked some more. Our breakfast turned into lunch and then turned into almost dinner. And but again, it wasn't really about, okay, how do we do this? It was just about the idea, the people in the sport. And I remember, I went home and, Di's like, wow, that was a long breakfast. And I'm like, yeah, well, I'm not sure, but I think we may try to do something. And, and she started crying and she said, Tim, I was hoping you wouldn't walk away because I don't think you'd survive without the sport. And she was 100% right. So that was kind of how that all came together. And just a side note, after she said that, she said the only thing it would have took her, if she would have said no way, no how, I wouldn't have done it. Yeah. But her only request was that we consider Sunshine as our driver.
Of course.
So
yeah.
So on the good nights, we all take a little credit. On the bad nights, we say, well, that's your driver.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Oh, and that's so, I can't even put a word onto it because racing is kind of like what took your son, but racing is what kept your son.
Oh, yeah, 100%. It's interesting as we've gone through this and, I think, Taylor said it in the documentary, right? Like legacies can fade, right? Just time can, I don't know what the right word here is, but, it just kind of deafens the legacy, right? Stats that you had that you were on top of, now you're not, now all of a sudden you're not part of the conversation. With Bryan making the decision to be an organ donor, what he did for humanity after his death far outweighs anything he ever did in a race car, knowing that his racing career and the people in the sport are what helped his legacy after he was gone.
Yeah. And it's the racing world. As much as we have, like, I don't know about you, but sometimes I have a love-hate relationship with the racing world. Mm-hmm. But in times, like, it could be your biggest competitor on the track, and they will be there when you're needed. Like, you need it.
Well, and it's interesting because, when I race, but then when Bryan and I were racing together, very highly competitive, very in tune to what was happening in our pits only. I didn't really care what was happening in anybody else's pits. Our job was to go there to win. Yeah. And there were nights when I'd be more frustrated and not winning than Bryan was. And, Bryan would just have these ways of, we were at Kokomo one night and, we're leading it and battling and they kind of got together and we end up running second or third or whatever it was. And we're down there and I'm just fuming. And he's like, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, well, I ran in the side of you. And he's like, Dad, if I don't screw up 2 laps before, you don't even get to me. And he goes, and besides, do you not think they work just as hard as we do? Can't you be happy for somebody that maybe puts in the same effort we do and they have a victory? Yeah. And it really, in the moment, it did change my outlook. Obviously, coming back after, um, it's weird, but I find joy in seeing other people's victories. It's I know a lot of people around me are like, what do we didn't win. And I'm like, yeah, but I can find joy in the totality of what we're doing, not just in what I'm doing, if that makes sense. Which has now given me this I don't, you don't, even the best of teams, win 4 out of 10 races, right? Which means most of the time you're gonna go home mad.
Yeah.
I don't anymore, and we if we gave it our best shot and came up short, I can be happy for who we're racing against, and I enjoy watching the successes of others.
I love that. I feel like that's like a full circle moment of like the son teaching the father.
Oh, 100%. Oh, I could go on and on. The grounding at times that he gave me. I think again his life experience racing, the things he got to do, the people he got to meet, the from every aspect of the sport, um, made who he was as a racer, right? And then he was sharing that with me, these different perspectives, and that I never had an opportunity to learn because I was so focused when I was driving or when I was racing with him on just hyper focused on the task at hand.
And I love now that you get to trickle like a little bit of Bryan into all of your drivers that you have now. Like, how amazing is that?
I mean, it's incredible, and and it's one of the things that's so important. Sunshine's growth. When you're a racer, that age from 12 to 16 is so important because I think it's in that time where you do develop your true love for the sport, right? If you're willing to do, to sleep in your truck to go race, to go scrounge tires to go race, to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to go work a full summer for no pay, and bust my ass just for an opportunity. You learn in that time frame if you love to do it, right? And then if you're lucky enough to do it with somebody who has a good approach, well, those are the tendencies you pick up on. Mm-hmm. And Sunshine, and I tell him all the time, I don't know how he does it at times because there is a burden for him driving for us, right? Because there's always that comparison. He wins King's Royal, right? The second year in a sprint car, he wins King's Royal, and the first question is, what would Bryan think? Yeah. But he does do a good job of honoring his, friend, and they became very close, obviously, during that time. But so to get to watch him now do what he's doing, but yet still see some of that influence that comes from way back. God, I think we're going on 15 years ago now when we were just beating around the country running midgets. Is pretty special.
I totally agree. So let's turn a little bit here onto you. So mm-hmm. I feel like a lot of what you do, it's to honor Bryan, but I'm curious about you. Mm-hmm. I feel like I was saying before is everywhere I look, Tim's here, Tim's there, Tim's doing this, Tim's doing that. You got, you're working with your wife, your daughter, Driven to Save Lives. You're helping these drivers, but like, what when the cameras aren't rolling, like what does life look like for you? Like maybe like a week to week basis.
I mean, honestly, it's what you see. I'm blessed from the standpoint that, through Bryan's racing career, I've got to meet a lot of just wonderful people, right? And I get to look at the sport from different aspects now, not just as a team owner. And I'll give you an example. When the BC 39 started, we ran our teams out there. Usually 3-4 cars. And Doug Bowles had, not early on, but he was always like, "Man, we need you is to help promote this, and the fans want to be intimate with the Clawson family during this event." And I kind of like, who wants that from me, right? Like, and so 2 years ago, we ran our last BC39 as a team. Last year, I went out solely to essentially hang around Doug Bowles, right? But the response that I got from the drivers and a lot of car owners that we had raced years together with, that we've never even had a conversation, right? But because we weren't in this competitive atmosphere, it was cool, right? It was neat to get this different perspective on this event that I'd gone to since day one. As a competitor, only worried about trying to win the race. Now I'm there supporting it as a whole. I didn't really care who won the race, because I knew whoever won it, it was going to mean just as much to them as, fortunately we got to win it with Zeb Wise the, second or third year. So I know what that meant. And now to get to see that, Justin Grant won it last year, and to see that what it meant to him was exactly how I felt when we won it. Looking back, the first one that Brady won, so now to get to attack it from that side is, it's even more special to be a part of the sport, not just as a team owner or even at some level Brian's dad, if that makes sense.
That it's like you take one hat off, you put the other one on. I'm him today.
Yeah, it's just evolving, and again, I think a lot of it goes back to having the ability to find joy, in others. I kind of look at it now that if we run 100 races a year and I'm the only guy that could be happy because we win 100 races, well, what fun is that going to be to the rest of the pit area, if that makes sense? Like, so, I know I go overboard, like if we get beat, I make sure I get to, that driver and that team and congratulate him, because truly in my heart, I am happy for him.
Yeah.
Probably car owners are going, "Oh, that's, maybe not genuine," but it really is. I mean, I can feel the joy for others, which is cool, which is now what I get to do no matter where I get to go racing, or, being a part. I went to, our team was up in Butler racing the high limit race last night. And, an old friend of mine called me and, late in the week and said, "Hey, I'm going to Gateway. Let's, you jump in the car with me. Let's go over there." And so we went and spent the day at Gateway with their team. And I enjoyed it. Absolutely loved it. And so, yeah, getting to do different things, and with the Driven to Save Lives. I mean, obviously that, talking to fans and, and the wing stuff has opened up a whole new world for that for me too, because we're getting to see a lot of fans that haven't had that opportunity for us to connect after we lost Brian, even 7-8 years later. So, when we go to Pennsylvania, right, and there's, that, God, what best fan base in the world, and get to talk to, those fans and how emotional they still get, just talking about it. Yeah. So we both end up crying, or the whole group ends up crying. It's pretty special for sure.
It's a lot, but it's very respectful of you to do that for everyone else.
It's funny because, I kind of wear my heart on my sleeve. And so, when we get talking, I do get emotional, but it feels good. Like I tell everybody, I'm like, don't, I'm sorry. I'm like, no, don't be sorry. It reminds me that, it's still here. Yeah. And that's a good thing. It's therapeutic. It feels good. And I'm glad that we can cry together. And, so you get back to why we continue doing it. That's the reason, it's the people and, in every level of this sport, not just sprint car racing, but stock car, Indy car, NHRA, it doesn't matter. You go and these connections are made, and it's pretty special.
I'm again, I have the love-hate relationship with our sport, but it's better love than hate.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it can, there are moments, no doubt. But when I dig into those moments or things I see, and I go, you know what, man, it's this big compared to what, we all been through in this sport. So I'm going to take all the good that it has to offer and run with that. And, the bad things we'll put to the side.
There's always gonna be another day, another
Yeah,
race, always
that's
another
right.
race.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, okay, so for the people that listen in now, like how location wise for you, like are all the teams based like right where you live? For you, like are we in a garage right now? Are we in your
Yeah,
office?
yeah, we're in my office. Yeah, so we're located in Fishers, Indiana. I live in Noblesville, which is the next town up, city up. And so yeah, so we base the 7BC. Well, everything we do, we base out of here. Corey Day's program, we partnered with Jason Myers on that. And so with Corey, we're doing all the midweek high limit races, anything he runs in Indiana, and then we'll do, I think it's 15 other of the crown jewel type events. Knoxville, Tusky, Gold Cup, those type races. So, so now, like, obviously they're a West Coast team, so they have right now, and after they're out in the parking lot working, they have basically a team that's based out of here for Corey as well. So, yeah,
Okay, cool.
yeah,
I'm always curious because I'm trying to think of some random teams, but like there's some teams that again, like they just show up and they have people who maintain the cars, but then there's you who maintain like one or two of the cars or three of the cars, or like with my husband, he's 5 hours north of here. That's where the owners want the cars, so that's where he has to be.
Yeah, no, it's so like with us, we have a dedicated crew for the 7BC. And then last year and years past when we were doing the USAC stuff, I did all the, crew chief stuff on that. So when we kind of switched what we were doing and wanted to get full-time wing racing with everything that we do, I've been able to kind of step back from the turning wrenches piece of it, and be more on the business side of it, putting partnerships together. I mean, I think we're all seeing the growth in wing sprint cars right now. And with that growth, there's a lot of opportunity that I think we're going to see come to our sport. So trying to be on the front side of that, and not only help grow it for our own team, but hopefully be a part that helps grows it for all of us. It's in a way what we did with the Driven to Save Lives program. They're now a high limit series sponsor for the midweek races. We have a team that runs the midweek full-time, fully branded Driven to Save Lives. And it's been phenomenal for the brand, so now they want to continue to grow that out, and we're looking at some different avenues in the motorsports world to continue that growth as well. So that stuff, I love doing that stuff. Sometimes when you're turning wrenches, something gets ignored. But now the way we've got it kind of put together is I can kind of stay focused on some of those projects that I enjoy doing that as much as, when we go racing hands-on now.
I like that. It's a good system you have in place.
It seems to be. It's working right now.
As long as you're happy, that's all that matters.
Yeah, absolutely.
I respect that because there's so many people that like they take from the sport. You have to give back.
Yeah, look, I want to put this the right way. It's a selfish sport, right? I mean, it is. I mean, there's no two ways around it. It's a selfish sport. I do truly believe the majority of us want to give back. They want to see the growth of the sport. and I think everybody reaches a point in their life, in their, in their motorsports journey where that does become a reality. And when you're in the trenches racing every night, it's hard to look outside of what you're doing. Again, I'm not, if not for the way the racing community treated our family, and again, it hasn't changed one bit. It really opened my eyes to what this sport it truly is. Bryan saw it long ago, right? Bryan saw it back when he was racing. It probably took me just a little bit longer to see it, and again, find that joy in the success for everybody, not just one team.
Yeah. Oh wow. So, okay. Now I don't. You can tell us if you want to tell us, Tim.
Mm-hmm.
So, what do you foresee for yourself, like in the coming years? Like, do you have this? Like you said, you've shifted gears. You're on the forefront more. You're really trying to like do more for the sport, not just your team and all that you do, but like, do you have this big vision? Do you have some things in plan, motion? Anything you could share?
I feel like we've always got something going. The thing that I love about Richard Marshall and Jennifer and Di and myself, our partnership, is that we're not afraid of maybe stepping outside the box, like doing the 500 in 2019. I remember when we decided to do that, I think in the moment I thought, boy, the dirt track world's going to really get behind us on this. And, you read message boards and, maybe not so, but as we went and then, we make the show, and then, we had Pippa in the car and she just did a wonderful job. It was like, okay, well, what's next? What can we do? Can we take it a step further? Our goal back then, honestly, was to run a multi-year program with that, and ultimately, have sunshine in it. And but COVID hit. Some of the I don't want to say the politics of it, but just where we were in the food chain, we weren't going to be able to get what we felt we needed at the right time. And then, of course, then COVID did hit. The world shut down, and probably saved our business not doing it at that time. So I don't know. We always, we talk about that. I'm really excited about where we're seeing wing sprint car racing at right now. I think, obviously, look, we're a high limit team. I think what Brad and Kyle's vision is, the opportunity for owners, maybe for the first time ever, to become viable. I'm not saying make money at it, but maybe there's a break-even point for the owners. It really excites me. And so it's like one of the reasons I went to Gateway yesterday was to learn more about business, how they're attacking some of the challenges that they have down there right now, or over there right now. And does any of it relate to as we grow, are the things that we're seeing there that we can learn from trials and tribulations that they're going through right now. So that part of the sport intrigues me a lot, and again, I think, we're seeing it, with what Brad and Kyle brought in. Obviously, what the Outlaws are doing for their teams now is tremendous. What I know, I look at what we're doing right now, and it's good. I look at the viewership that we're seeing on Flow particularly, and it's amazing. And so you kind of go, okay, well, what are our next step to keep this growth going? And so that part of it right now is really, really exciting to me.
Okay. And then, gosh, I remember in our little nutshell of the world in the Northeast, when Brad and Kyle came out with the high limit, it was like not an upset, but like kind of it shook things up, right?
Mhm.
And I look at that as, up here in our little I call them our mud turtle bubble, is that we have two competing series for modifieds, and as frustrating as it is, like we want everyone to work together, but high limit coming in, they're making people level up.
Yeah, 100%. I believe that. And, um, my partner has a World Outlaw team, right, with Ricky.
Yeah.
And so so we get to, we all watch that very intimately and what they're doing over there. And the thing that I see in wing sprint car racing anyway is no matter the acronym, it's all going up and to the right. We're racing for bigger purses. There's more incentives for car owners. The racing has been phenomenal this year. Does each one have a hiccup here and there? Yeah, but they always have. It's issues that we see. I'm not gonna say nightly, but issues that we see aren't new because a new series came along. They've always been there. I think what now is the proponents on one side and this side point them out a lot harder. And but I mean, I think it's I certainly don't think it's bad for the sport at all. I know for us, and it seems if you look at earnings and things like that for the teams, it's up across the board.
Yeah.
And again, I don't think any from an owner standpoint, it isn't that we're not looking to make money. We just don't want it to cost money, if that makes sense. If we can get to zero on the balance sheet at the end of the year, then that's a win for as far as I'm concerned. So
yeah, gosh, I don't know if I think it was maybe last year, Tim. Someone had posted. I think it was like a late model team. They like did a sheet of all like what it would cost just for like a weekend of racing, and I'm like, I don't know if people want to know that.
Well, and it's because I follow, when somebody's going to tell you how much it costs to go racing, and it depending on the level you're racing in, they're probably close.
Yeah.
But insurance, what's something that we do is we carry owners and sponsor insurance. It's not cheap. It's not cheap, but it's protected, right? So there's things that are that nobody wants to put a line item to that are a line item. And so the engine cost, the tire cost, the fuel cost, the travel cost, hotels, all that's pretty easy to get to. But there's a lot of other stuff depending upon how your team's set up that also adds to the line items of expenses that you got to try to figure out how to make it make sense.
Yeah, how to make it make sense is true.
And becoming, fortunately, again, for whatever reasons, it's becoming a little easier. So.
And that's something Mike and I have talked about, and my brother too, is like, I mean, I don't know what it is precisely, but in our modified world, like there aren't as many owners anymore. And it was actually, which I'm sure you would totally get, because I'm sure you guys love Grandview also. Like we go to Grandview, Mike won a big race at the beginning of this year there, and not only did they have like a really badass trophy, but they had like just the littlest thing, Tim. They had a trophy for the owner. You know what I mean? Like they had a trophy for the driver and a trophy for the owner. Like, okay, maybe the owner didn't like get extra money or something, but it's like the acknowledgement. Like what High Limit's doing, what the Outlaws are doing, we don't travel as far as you guys do. But I feel like that's where we're kind of missing, is we don't have as many owners as like you guys do out west.
Yeah, and I think if you look across the board, right, I think we're seeing a lot more family teams, right?
Yeah.
Honestly, you look at like what Rico and Brian Brown do with their program, right? They're, I guess, essentially a self-owned team, but the way they work with their marketing and branding partners is incredible, and they control their own destiny there. And so you're seeing these different, drivers who have come up that, were like, okay, I'm going to just focus on being a race car driver, go go find somebody to hire me and do it that way. The owner base, I think, is continuing to shrink. And you reach a point in this deal where I truly believe just life, right? I mean, no matter, at some point you reach a point in it all where you go, I mean, we just saw it in NASCAR last week where ownership goes, you know what? All this money we're putting into it, where I'm at in my life, it just doesn't make sense anymore, right? So not that they don't love the sport still, they do, but priorities change. And if you're spending what a lot of owners have to spend, maybe it becomes easier to get to that point sooner, and whereas if it can become at least viable, the interest stays there from an ownership side. So, but there are a lot of, again, there's a lot of different ways to do it. I talked to Brian Brown a bit. I love the way he's doing it, and a lot of things teams try to emulate now. What the way he's doing it, the way Rico's doing it.
I don't want to say it's smart, but it's smart.
Yeah, I mean, but it takes a special person to be able to do. To do all that those two guys do to market themselves and their teams. It's not just winning races, right? If Rico goes out or Brian goes out and they're, just winning races, and then they've got another team they're driving for that handles all that, well, that's a lot of weight off their shoulders, right? But they take the responsibility of their own teams and their own successes, and it's, like I said, it's just a different way to do it.
I'm curious. Well, we're gonna have to circle back in like 10 years from now.
Sure.
Not 10 years, but I'm thinking like I can see that growing ever so more. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, I think where we're headed as a sport, the opportunity is for growth is there, and I think the opportunity to bring in owners at that national type level can get there. And hopefully we can all be a part of that.
Yeah. Okay, so, man, we can continue talking. Let me tell you what. But so Tim, what I always like to do with my podcast episodes is I always like to leave something like tips or some kind of word of advice, and I really sat hard on this one because the people we raised for, George and Julie, they had actually lost their son at 34 last year, and it's definitely as you know, it's a shakeup, and maybe it's for parents who have lost a child, or it could just be parents who they have a child that races. Like what piece of advice, or maybe just some words of comfort do you feel like you could offer them?
Wow, that's tough, because the one thing that I've learned through all of this is everybody handles grief differently, right? In that loss. And a perfect example of that is my wife and I, right? We literally handled it opposite. She, she wanted everybody around all the time. I wanted nobody around any of the time. But we sat down very soon after we got back and said, look, I understand how you need to process this. And she said, I understand how you need to process this. And so we were able to have an understanding, that we had to each, deal with it our way and support that. And we did. And, I think her and I are probably stronger because of that understanding. And it's, kind of going back to the documentary, right? Like the understanding that I got for other people's, how they were processing things, I mean, honestly stunned me. Like, you get so caught up in your own grief, right? You're just trying to get to this next moment that you don't even, I'm just totally me. I didn't even give consideration to how his best friend was dealing with it, how, Blake Anderson was dealing with it, how Stridge was dealing with it, how, you know, because you're just so consumed by your own. Um, and again, watching the movie, I got this documentary, I got this understanding of others. And so, I mean, I don't know if that's what you were looking for, but
No, I like that a lot because, you know, like you said, I mean, you're in your head 24/7. You know,
mhm,
you know what's going on through here, and you're trying to grieve in your own way, even if it's different than your daughter or, you know, your wife or Lauren. And just to, I don't know if I don't even know if the word humbling is the correct word to use, but knowing again, like there's other people out there with you that are are going through it in a sense, but differently. Like every person that Bryan has like encountered went through it,
mhm.
but at a different level. Like I feel like every person knew a little bit of Bryan in different ways, and again, the documentary does such a phenomenal job of like full circle moment of that.
Yeah, no, 100%. And that's, you know, I think that's probably everything that comes out of that documentary is all these different aspects of his life all come together, right? In an hour and 45-minute documentary. And, you know, especially from fans, right? And it's ironic because a lot of them come out of Pennsylvania that will reach out, and I honestly feel they were as devastated and still are today as us as a family, you know, and because of their interactions with him and how much it meant to them. And that's really where I've kind of, you know, don't get me wrong, I've always appreciated the love and support and the caring and how bad, you know, how much angst they had. But after watching the documentary, I got a really better understanding of the, all the different perspectives from fans and friends and family, and you know, and it all. And um, you know, in a sense, this sounds right. Us as a family, we're blessed to have Bryan's life documented the way it was, right? And again, I'll go back to the statement that Di made. You know, what, a week ago Monday, 2 weeks ago Monday, we got to spend 2 hours with Bryan, with our son, as we remembered him, as his growing up as a kid, and his quarter midgets and go karts, and you know, we are so blessed to not only have the memories of it, but then to have the documented memories of it is just incredible.
Yeah, and that's
Um,
well, it's like you said, the stats and you know memories fade, and
mhm.
you don't want to lose that piece of Bryan, and so
No,
to be able to have that all of that documented is
yeah,
just incredible.
yeah. Well, and I'll share a story from that night. So Kyle and Caitlin came, which, number one, with everything that kid had going on for the month of May, for him to, you know, them to take the time to come to it.
Yeah.
But we had all forgotten that during that those episodes they were doing, that Kyle took the camera for a day.
Yeah.
And you know, so there's that piece of it in there. So after we were done watching it, he's like, Tim, man, he goes, I forgot that I had done that, but that all these memories are flooding back now from that time. And it was just, you know, again, I think being able to have it documented is, I mean, it's a gift. It truly is.
Yeah, I agree. And that's it. You, hey, you'll laugh at this. So my brother's daughter, my niece, she's 3.
Hmm.
I don't know if you guys have you ever heard of a juice box?
Yes, yes.
Okay, you have.
We have grandsons that are 7 and 5, so yes.
Okay. So I was dying. Her first race was, I don't know, maybe like a month ago. And here comes good old Aunt Mandee. I am putting GoPros on a juice box, Tim. I look at my brother and I'm like what are other people thinking right now of this family coming in strapping GoPros to a 3-year-old's juice box? I'm like, I want to look back at these memories. I don't care what other people think. I'm like, it is going to be so amazing to see wherever they end up in life, like to
Yeah.
be able to have that.
Yeah, well, we got the opportunity now, right? It's become part of our society, and it's it's definitely incredible that even going back, you know 10, 15, 20, 25 years ago now, and some of the footage that Dean Mills was such a huge part of.
He's awesome.
I've known Dean since we were kids, basically. I mean, racing at Placerville, and him being a 15-year-old up on the hill with his big old video camera doing his thing. And then of course when we had Bryan, and he was around for that, so he did a lot of some of the behind the scenes stuff that he has is just incredible to go back and watch. And so we're fortunate Bryan grew up in an age where documenting that stuff wasn't so outrageous, right? Like it becomes normal, and it's cool now to have that, not only for us, but again, as the organ donation legacy of his life grows. Perfect example is the group at Indiana Donor Network that does such a great job with Driven to Save Lives and promoting organ donation through motorsports. They didn't know Bryan. They knew they knew of the racing side. Well, of course, they all came to, and they're like, we get why it resonates now. We get why the community supports this cause, and so that's pretty cool to have that. So
yeah, and it's so much more heartfelt.
Yes.
That
Yeah.
connection. I love that. Oh my god. Okay, so Tim,
Mhm.
again, we could talk forever, but we're gonna schedule something up again. We're gonna talk about
Anytime.
we're conquering the world. I can't wait. So
Yeah.
thank you so much for taking the time to be on here. You're always such a pleasure, and just like Bryan, always so humbling. Whenever I always see you guys, always like open arms. So thank you again, and truly wish the best of luck to you, your team, your family, all that you guys have going on this season.
Well, I appreciate it. And to you guys too, and your family, and obviously, your dad, and us getting to watch your brother race through all the USAC stuff. It's an honor as well. So appreciate what you do.
Yeah. And listen, after this, I'm gonna have to call Billy and tell him we're gonna have to go to Indiana. We need to make a trip.
There we go. There we go.
So, oh gosh. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. Be sure to like this, share this, give Tim and Clawson Marshall a shout out on social media. Keep your eyes out for them. Absolutely in victory lane this season. Thank you all for listening in, and hopefully we will catch you all next week. If not, we will catch everyone at the races. So Tim, it has been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
You bet. Thank you, Mandee.